Tuesday evening. The house is quiet again. Margaret's upstairs reading, and I'm down here in what she calls my cave. This den with the worn leather chair and the lamp that's been flickering for 3 weeks now. I should fix it. I will. Eventually. I've been thinking about something lately. Something I can't quite shake. It hit me last week during the neighborhood barbecue when Tom's wife, Linda, made that comment. We were all standing around the grill, and she said, half joking but not really, "You know what's funny? You men get quieter every year. It's like watching someone turn down the volume on life." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. But later, driving home, her words stuck with me like a splinter I couldn't quite locate. Because she's right. I am quieter now. We all are. Me, Tom, Bill, Jack, all of us guys who used to fill rooms with our voices, our stories, our opinions on everything from carburetor maintenance to Cold War politics. Now we stand in circles, nodding, offering the occasional grunt of agreement, letting the silence do most of the talking. So I've been asking myself, when did this happen? When did I become this person who measures his words like a miser counting coins? And more importantly, why? I'm writing this down because I think I've figured something out. Not everything, mind you. I'm 60, not some enlightened guru sitting cross-legged on a mountaintop. But I've been turning this question over in my mind for days now, examining it from different angles like a mechanic looking at an engine that won't turn over. And I think I understand some things about men and silence that I never quite put into words before. Maybe that's the irony. I'm using words to explain why I've stopped using them. Let me start at the beginning, or at least where I think the beginning might be. I wasn't always quiet. God, no. When I was 20, 25, 30 even, I talked constantly. I had opinions about everything. I knew how the world worked, how it should work, how I'd fix it if anyone would just listen. I remember marathon conversations with my college roommate, sitting up until 3 in the morning, solving global warming, racial injustice, economic inequality, all solved by dawn, at least in theory. I remember early dates with Margaret, talking for hours over cheap wine and cheaper pasta, convinced that my thoughts on Hemingway or the Beatles or Vietnam were profound, necessary, urgent. I talked at work. I talked at parties. I talked to strangers at gas stations. The world seemed like it was waiting to hear what Walter had to say. And then, gradually, almost imperceptibly, the volume knob started turning down. It wasn't a decision. That's important to understand. I didn't wake up one morning and think, you know what? I'm going to stop talking so much. It was more like erosion, the way a river slowly wears down a stone. You don't notice it happening until one day you look at the stone and realize it's half the size it used to be. The first thing that changes, I think, is that you start to hear yourself, really hear yourself. And once you do, you realize how much of what you've been saying is just noise, recycled opinions, borrowed thoughts, things you say because you've always said them, not because you've actually thought about them recently. I remember the exact moment this hit me. I was 42, at a dinner party at the Hendersons' place. Someone brought up healthcare reform. This was years ago, different administration, same arguments, and I launched into my usual speech about market forces and government overreach, hitting all my talking points like a politician on autopilot. But midway through, I caught Margaret's eye across the table. She wasn't looking at me with pride or agreement or even disagreement. She was looking at me the way you might look at a commercial you've seen 100 times. Not quite tuning it out, but not really listening either. Just waiting for it to be over. That look stopped me cold, because I realized in that instant that I'd given this exact speech before, multiple times, to these exact people. I was a recorded message playing on repeat, and everyone knew it, and they were all too polite to tell me to shut up. I finished the speech, couldn't exactly stop mid-sentence, but something shifted inside me that night. I started listening to myself more carefully after that. And once you start really listening to yourself, You can't unhear the patterns, the repetitions, the places where you're just filling air because silence makes you uncomfortable. But it's not just about hearing yourself. It's about hearing others too, really hearing them. When you're young, you listen to respond. Someone says something, and while they're still talking, you're already formulating your counter-argument. Your story that's better than their story. Your experience that trumps their experience. Conversation feels like a competition, and you're determined to win. Somewhere in your 50s, if you're paying attention, you realize that nobody actually wants to be competed with. They just want to be heard. And more than that, you realize that most people, including you, don't actually have that many original thoughts. We're all drawing from the same well of human experience, just thinking we're the first ones to notice that the water's cold. I watch my son-in-law, Derek, at family dinners. He's 34, smart guy, works in tech, always has something to say about algorithms or user interfaces or whatever the latest thing is. And I see myself in him, that need to demonstrate knowledge, to prove value through volume. Last Thanksgiving, he explained cryptocurrency to the table for 20 minutes straight. Nobody asked him to. Nobody was particularly interested. But he needed to say it. Needed us to know that he understood this thing we didn't. I don't blame him. I was him. Hell, part of me still is him, somewhere deep down. But I don't have that hunger anymore, that need to fill every silence with proof of my own relevance. And once you lose that hunger, you realize how exhausting it was to constantly feed it. There's something else, too. Something harder to admit. You get tired of being wrong. I've been confidently wrong about so many things in my life. I was certain the internet was a fad that would never replace libraries. I was sure my back problems would heal on their own without physical therapy. I knew exactly how to raise children, right up until I had children and realized I didn't know a damn thing. I had strong opinions about politics, religion, money, marriage, all of it. And time has proven me wrong, or at least not quite right, about most of it. When you're young, being wrong is just part of the learning process. You bounce back from it. You adjust your views and charge forward with new certainties. But after you've been wrong a few dozen times about things you are absolutely certain about, you start to hedge your bets. This isn't wisdom, exactly. Or maybe it is. Maybe wisdom is just accumulated wrongness, the sum total of all your mistakes teaching you to speak less and listen more. Either way, it changes how you move through the world. I see this with my friend Bill. He used to have an opinion on everything: how to fix the school system, what the city council should do about parking, which restaurant made the best ribs. Now, when someone asks him what he thinks about something, he'll pause. Really pause, and then say something like, "I don't know enough about it to say." And he means it. Not in a false modesty way, but in a genuine, "I've learned that my opinions are worth less than I used to think they were" kind of way. People mistake this for apathy or disengagement. They think we're checking out, that we don't care anymore. But it's the opposite. We care too much to run our mouths about things we don't fully understand. We've learned that having an opinion isn't the same as having something worth saying. Then there's the exhaustion of it all. Just the sheer physical and emotional exhaustion of maintaining relationships through constant communication. I have a cousin, Janet, who calls me every few weeks. Sweet woman, means well. But every conversation is like running a marathon. She needs to tell me about her neighbor's divorce, and her daughter's promotion, and what she saw on the news, and what her doctor said about her cholesterol. And did I hear about so-and-so from high school dying? And isn't it terrible about the weather? And on and on and on. And the thing is, she expects me to match her energy. She wants me to volley back with equal enthusiasm, to share my own stories, to keep the rally going. But I'm tired. Not just physically tired, though I am that too. I'm tired of the performance of it all. Because that's what conversation often is, a performance. You're performing interest, performing agreement or disagreement, performing the version of yourself that you think the other person wants to see. It's like being on stage for a play you didn't audition for and don't remember the lines to. Margaret and I have been married 37 years. We have whole conversations now without speaking. I'll come home from the hardware store and she'll look at me and know I forgot the thing I went there to buy. I'll glance at her during a movie and she'll know I think it's terrible, but I'm gonna sit through it anyway because she's enjoying it. We've earned our silence, her and me. We've put in the hours, the thousands of hours of talking, and now we can just be quiet together without it meaning something's wrong. That's a relief, honestly. Being with someone who doesn't need you to fill every moment with noise. Who understands that silence isn't emptiness? It's just another form of communication. But with everyone else, with acquaintances and distant relatives and neighbors and old colleagues, the expectation is still there that you'll perform, that you'll engage, that you'll maintain this constant stream of small talk and medium talk and occasionally deep talk. And at 60, I just don't have the energy for it anymore. I've also learned that most conversations are just people waiting for their turn to talk. This sounds cynical, but watch people sometime. Really watch them. Watch how their eyes glaze over while you're speaking, how they're clearly just waiting for you to pause so they can jump in with their own thing. Watch how quickly they redirect any story you tell back to themselves. I do it too. We all do it. It's human nature. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you can unsee it, participating in those conversations feels hollow. You start to think, what's the point? We're not actually connecting here. We're just taking turns performing monologues. There are exceptions, of course. Every once in a while, you have a real conversation where both people are actually listening, actually exchanging ideas rather than just trading airtime. Those conversations are precious, but they're rare. Increasingly rare, it seems. Most of the time, it's just noise masquerading as connection. And once you realize that, it becomes harder to generate the enthusiasm required to participate in the masquerade. Here's something else I've noticed. The older you get, the less interested people are in what you have to say anyway. This isn't self-pity, just observation. When you're young and middle-aged, people ask for your opinions. They want to know what you think about their career choices, their relationships, their problems. You're seen as relevant, engaged with the world, someone whose perspective has value. But somewhere in your 60s, you cross this invisible line where people start treating you like you're out of touch. Your opinions become old-fashioned. Your experiences are from a different era. Your advice is well-meaning, but not quite applicable to the modern world. My daughter, Emily, does this without even realizing it. She'll start telling me about some problem at work, and I'll begin to offer a suggestion based on my 30 years in management, and she'll cut me off with, "Well, things are different now, Dad. It's not like when you worked." And you know what? Maybe she's right. Maybe things are different. But maybe they're not as different as she thinks. Maybe human nature doesn't change that much, and office politics in 2025 aren't radically different from office politics in 1995. But she's not really interested in testing that hypothesis. She just wants to be heard, not advised. So I've learned to stop offering advice unless specifically asked. And people rarely ask. They say they want your opinion, but what they really want is validation for the opinion they already have. And if you can't provide that, they'd rather you just stay quiet. It's easier to give them what they want. There's also the simple fact that we're living in a faster world, and I'm moving slower. Conversations happen at a pace I can't always keep up with anymore. At the barbecue last week, the younger folks were talking about some streaming show I haven't seen, referencing memes I don't understand, using slang I have to consciously translate in my head. By the time I've processed what was said and formulated a response, the conversation has already moved on to 3 other topics. It's like trying to board a train that's already left the station. You can run after it, waving your arms, shouting, "Wait for me." But at some point, you just stop running and watch it disappear down the tracks. This isn't bitterness. It's just reality. Culture moves fast now, faster than it did when I was young. And my brain, wonderful as it is, doesn't move as fast as it used to. I need time to process, to think, to formulate. And modern conversation doesn't really allow for that time. It demands quick wit, rapid-fire exchanges, instant opinions. So I've adapted by saying less. Better to be thought a quiet observer than to be the old guy who's always one beat behind, explaining some reference from 1987 that nobody cares about. But here's the thing that really gets me, the thing I've been circling around this whole time. I think men stop talking because we finally learn what women have known all along, that most talk is just talk. It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't change anything. It's just sound waves hitting air, dissipating into nothing. Margaret knew this at 30, maybe at 20. She's always been comfortable with silence, never felt the need to fill every moment with commentary. When something breaks, she fixes it. When something's wrong, she deals with it. But she doesn't need to have long discussions about it beforehand, doesn't need to process it verbally, doesn't need to announce her intentions to the world. I used to think this was a quirk of hers. Now I realize she was just ahead of me. She'd already learned what I'm only now figuring out, that action speaks louder than words isn't just a cliché. It's a fundamental truth about how the world works. I spent my 30s talking about the novel I was going to write. Never wrote it. I spent my 40s talking about getting in shape. Never did it. I spent my early 50s talking about traveling more, starting that business, learning Italian. None of it happened because I was too busy talking about it to actually do it. Now, in my 60s, I'm done talking about things. If I'm going to do something, I'll just do it. And if I'm not going to do it, I won't torture everyone with my fantasies about it. This is what Linda meant about the volume turning down. We're not becoming less engaged with life. We're becoming more engaged with reality. And reality doesn't require a running commentary. There's a loneliness to this, though. I won't pretend there isn't. Sometimes I'll be sitting in a room full of people, and I'll have a thought I want to share. Something I think is funny or insightful or interesting. But I'll run through the mental calculation. Is it worth saying? Will it contribute to the conversation or just clutter it? Will people actually care or will they just be polite? And by the time I've done the math, the moment has passed. And there's a part of me, a small but persistent part, that mourns the loss of that younger Walter who would have just said it, who wouldn't have second-guessed or calculated or worried, who would have just thrown his thoughts out into the world and let them land where they may. But that Walter was also kind of exhausting, if I'm being honest. He talked too much. He dominated conversations. He mistook volume for wisdom and persistence for insight. He had a lot to say, but not as much worth saying as he thought. Still, there are moments when I miss him, when I feel the weight of my own silence, the accumulated hours of unspoken thoughts piling up like snow on a roof, when I wonder if my quietness is growth or just giving up. Margaret says I'm overthinking it. She says, "Walter, you still talk plenty. You're just more selective about what you say and who you say it to." That's not a bad thing. Maybe she's right. Probably she's right. But it still feels like something's been lost, even if what's been gained is peace. I think about my father sometimes. He died when I was 45, lived to be 78. The last decade of his life, he barely spoke at all. We'd sit together watching baseball, and he'd go entire games without saying more than "good catch" or "bad call." I used to think he was depressed. Now I wonder if he was just tired. Tired of repeating himself. Tired of performing. Tired of pretending his opinions mattered to anyone but himself. Maybe he just reached the logical endpoint of the journey I'm on now.
Complete, comfortable silence. Or maybe he was depressed. I'll never know. We never talked about it. Ironic, right? All these words I'm writing about not talking, and I couldn't even ask my father why he was so quiet. I like to think he was at peace, though. I like to think his silence was contentment, not surrender. That he'd finally learned what Margaret knew and what I'm learning, that you don't have to narrate your life to live it fully. Last weekend, my grandson Tyler came over. He's 12 now, all energy and questions and that beautiful obliviousness to how the world works. We were out in the garage, and I was showing him how to change a tire. Not because he needed to know who changes tires anymore, but because his mom thought it would be good bonding time. And it was, but not because we talked much. I showed him how to position the jack, how to loosen the lugs before raising the car, how to torque them back down in a star pattern. He asked questions, I answered. But mostly we just worked, hands greasy, the smell of rubber and motor oil hanging in the air. At one point, he was struggling with a particularly tight bolt, really putting his shoulder into it. And I almost launched into a speech about persistence, about how the hardest things in life require the same kind of sustained effort, about how he should apply this lesson to his schoolwork and his relationships and his future career. But I didn't. I just said, that's it. Keep going. You've almost got it. And he did get it. The bolt came loose, and his face lit up with that pure joy of accomplishment. And in that moment, I realized that my silence had given him something my speech never could have: the full ownership of his own success, unmarred by my need to turn it into a teaching moment. Later, driving him home, he said, "That was cool, Grandpa. Thanks for showing me." And I said, "Anytime, buddy." That was it. That was the whole exchange. No big emotional moment, no bonding declaration, no forced intimacy. Just a simple acknowledgement of time spent together, working on something real. And it was perfect. It was everything it needed to be. I think that's what I'm really learning in my 60s. That less can be more. That silence can be full. That you don't have to say everything you think. And in fact, you probably shouldn't. The world is loud enough without my constant contribution to the noise. It doesn't need another opinion on politics or movies or the best way to grill a steak. It has plenty of those already. All of them confident. All of them certain they're right. All of them drowning each other out. What the world might actually need is more people who are comfortable being quiet, who can sit with others without feeling the need to fill every moment with chatter, who understand that presence doesn't require performance. I'm not saying I've achieved some Zen state of perfect silence. I still talk. I still have opinions and stories and thoughts I want to share. I'm writing this whole thing down after all, which is just talking on paper. But I'm more selective now. I ask myself, does this need to be said? Does it need to be said by me? Does it need to be said by me right now? And increasingly, the answer is no. There's something else I've been thinking about. Maybe men stop talking because we finally understand how little we understand. When you're young, the world makes sense. It's simple. Things are right or wrong, good or bad, fair or unfair. You have answers. You have solutions. You know what needs to be done, if only people would listen. But the older you get, the more you see the complexity of things. You realize that most problems don't have simple solutions, that most questions don't have clear answers, that life is mostly shades of gray, with occasional flashes of black and white that disappear as soon as you look at them directly. I used to think I understood economics. Now, I'm not even sure the economists understand economics. I used to think I understood parenting. Then my kids grew up to be people I never quite expected, despite my best efforts to shape them. I used to think I understood Margaret. After 37 years, she still surprises me regularly. The universe is vastly more complicated than I gave it credit for when I was 25 and had everything figured out. And the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know, how much nobody knows really. We're all just stumbling through, making educated guesses, hoping we're not causing too much damage along the way. And once you understand that, what is there to say? How do you pontificate when you're not sure of anything? How do you give advice when you can barely navigate your own life? How do you speak with authority when you know, deep in your bones, that you have no authority to speak of? You don't. You just get quiet and hope that your silence is interpreted as wisdom rather than confusion. I went to my 50th high school reunion a few months ago. Hadn't been to one since the 20th. So I was curious to see how everyone had turned out. What struck me most was how quiet the men were. Not silent, but subdued. We stood in clusters, nursing our beers, nodding along to our wives' conversations, occasionally chiming in with a word or two, but mostly just present. Compare that to the 20th reunion, when we were all in our late 30s, still young enough to compete, still trying to impress each other with our successes, our careers, our lives. The noise level then was incredible. Everyone talking over everyone else, trying to be heard, trying to prove they'd made something of themselves. At 50 years out, nobody cared anymore. We'd all made something of ourselves, or we hadn't. And either way, it didn't seem to matter much. The guys who'd become doctors weren't more respected than the guys who'd become electricians. The ones who'd stayed in town weren't viewed any differently than those who'd moved away. We'd all just lived our lives, and now we were old, and the competitive urge had drained away like water from a tub. There was something peaceful about it, something I didn't expect. We weren't trying to impress each other anymore. We were just existing in the same space, sharing the same memories, acknowledging the passage of time without needing to comment on it excessively. The women were still talking, still animated, still processing their lives through conversation. But the men had gone internal. We'd moved our processing inside our own heads, where it didn't bother anyone else. Margaret asked me tonight what I was writing. I told her I was trying to figure out why I'd gotten so quiet. She smiled and said, "Honey, you haven't gotten quiet. You've gotten wise. There's a difference." I don't know if that's true. Wisdom implies I've learned something valuable. All I've learned is that talking doesn't accomplish as much as I thought it did, that most of what I have to say has been said before by people smarter than me, to audiences more receptive than the ones I'm likely to find. But maybe that is wisdom. Maybe wisdom is just knowing when to shut up. I keep coming back to that comment at the barbecue. The volume turning down on life. Because it's not just about talking less. It's about everything getting quieter. The intensity of emotions, the urgency of desires, the volume of ambition. When I was 30, everything felt urgent. I needed to succeed now, buy a house now, get promoted now, prove myself now. There was this constant pressure, this internal voice screaming that time was running out, that I needed to make my mark, that if I didn't do it soon, I never would. At 60, that voice is quieted to a whisper. Sometimes it disappears entirely, not because I've given up on life or stopped caring about things, but because I've finally learned that the urgency was mostly manufactured, that time moves at its own pace regardless of my anxiety about it, that most things I thought were important simply weren't. This is terrifying to younger people. They look at guys like me and see resignation, defeat, the slow surrender to irrelevance. And maybe that's part of it. But mostly, I think they're seeing something they don't have a framework for yet. Contentment, acceptance, the hard-won peace of knowing that you don't have to be everything to everyone, that it's okay to just be yourself, quietly existing, taking up only the space you actually need. There are things I miss about being younger, about being louder,
I miss the certainty. I miss the energy. I miss believing that my voice mattered in some cosmic sense, that the words I spoke could change things. But I don't miss the exhaustion of it. I don't miss the constant performance, the need to always be on, always contributing, always proving. I don't miss the anxiety of wondering what people thought of what I said, whether I'd made the right impression, whether I'd won the conversation.
Now I say what I think needs saying and leave it at that. If people agree, great. If they don't, also great. It doesn't define me anymore. I'm not my opinions or my stories or my wit. I'm just Walter, sitting in his den, writing in a journal nobody will probably ever read, trying to understand why he's become the person he is. Here's what I think I've learned after all these words, all this circling around the question. Men stop talking after a certain age because we finally learn that we don't have to, that silence is okay, that we can just exist without constantly narrating our existence. We stop talking because we've said enough, because we've used up our allotment of words, and now we're content to let others take their turn. Because we've learned that listening is more valuable than speaking, that observation is more enlightening than commentary. We stop talking because we're tired. Not defeated tired, not given up tired, just the natural fatigue that comes from having been here a while, having seen things, having done things, and now wanting to rest a bit before whatever comes next. We stopped talking because we realized that most of what we wanted to say was just our own ego demanding to be heard. And once you see that, once you really see it, you can't unsee it. And you start to wonder why you ever thought your voice was so important in the first place. It's late now. Margaret's been asleep for hours. The house is doing that thing old houses do, settling into itself, making small creaks and sighs like it's trying to get comfortable for the night. I should probably wrap this up. Not because I've said everything I wanted to say. I'm not sure that's possible, but because at some point you have to stop talking and just let the silence speak for itself. Tomorrow I'll wake up, make coffee, maybe work on that lamp that's been flickering. I probably won't talk much, unless Margaret wants to talk, in which case I'll listen. I might see Tom or Bill or Jack, and we'll stand around, saying little, understanding much. I might call Emily, though she probably won't answer because she's busy with her own life, her own urgencies, her own need to fill the world with words. And I'll be okay with all of it. The talking and the not talking, the connection and the solitude, the noise and the silence. Because I've finally learned what took me 60 years to understand. It's all part of the same thing. Life doesn't require a running commentary. It just requires that you show up and pay attention. So that's what I'm doing now. Showing up, paying attention. And yes, being a little quieter than I used to be. Not because I have nothing to say, but because I've finally learned that I don't have to say it all.